Hello and welcome to a joint webinar by SpotMe and V7 on achieving HCP engagement with an omnichannel event approach. I'm Yuliya Sotska, Chief Brand and Communications Officer at V7, and I will be your host and moderator today. In the right-hand corner of your screen, you see a questions tab, a Q&A tab. Please submit them if you have not done so already, and keep them coming during the webinar. We will do our best to address them all throughout the session, and of course, in our Q&A session at the very end. Prior to kicking things off, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Pavlo Klymenko is the head of Omnichannel at V7, a MarTech services provider for pharma and life sciences. Pavlo is a practical expert in the field of life science and communications. At V7, he is leading the change in revolutionizing healthcare communications. As a global expert in marketing automation and Salesforce technologies, Pavlo is certified as Marketing Cloud Specialist, Consultant, Administrator, and Developer, and owns 2 additional Salesforce certifications. Welcome, Pavlo.
Hello, colleagues. Hello, Yuliya.
Olivier Aubert is Business Development and Partnerships Director at SpotMe. Olivier leads partnerships and alliances within the SpotMe technology ecosystem and is responsible for new enterprise customer acquisition. He manages top-tier and global accounts and brings to SpotMe over 12 years of experience in enterprise sales, corporate strategy, and management consulting in 7 different countries. Before joining SpotMe, Olivier worked with KPMG and NBN. Olivier graduated from McGill University. Olivier, welcome.
Hi, Yuliya. Hi, Pavlo. Pleasure to be here.
Glad you're here. And as you know, I'm Yuliya Sotska, Chief Brand and Communications Officer at V7, where I am responsible for the promotion of our corporate brand. I have more than 15 years of experience in communications and journalism. In the past, I've held leadership positions in global tech and media companies, served as Senior PR Manager at a leading 2S LGBTQI app, Deputy News Director at 1+1 Media in Ukraine, Editor-in-Chief at Ukraine Today, and News Program Editor at CTV News Channel in Canada. Now that we have all our introductions in order, Pavlo, Olivier, welcome once again. Glad we're all here today. Let's talk about the agenda for this session. We will be covering very exciting topics, as some of you have seen from our ads on LinkedIn, and we are set to cover all your burning questions throughout the session. But also, Olivier and Pavlo will provide us with specific cases and things to pay attention to. And yes, please submit your questions for our speakers throughout the webinar so we can cover them in the very end of this session. In section 1, we'll talk about the challenges and core goals in HCP engagement throughout the webinars. One-click registration utilizing SpotMe and Viva CRM and marketing automation integration will be our case today, and we'll do our best to cover it thoroughly and see how you can apply that in your organization. And section 2 will focus more on measurement, personalization, and ethical considerations in HCP engagement, as well as cover a case of a simple webinar registration on an HCP web portal. And of course, cover a case there. And section 3 should be very exciting for all of us. We'll be talking about emerging trends and recommendations for HCP engagement. So again, please submit your questions so we can get to them towards the very end of this conversation. And there will be polls throughout the webinar, so please answer them when they pop up on your screen. So without further ado, take these slides down and let's kick things off with our discussion. I'm going to start things off with an open-ended question here. What are the current challenges faced by pharma companies in engaging HCPs throughout webinars and virtual events? Pavlo, let's kick things off with you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Yuliya, for the question. Yeah. First of all, as we understand, webinars is also part of the overall omnichannel scope. So we need to treat the events, online events and offline events, hybrid events as the same. So pharma has more or less like some successes, some like good steps that they're taking toward like from multi-channel to omnichannel. But unfortunately, in many cases, online events and all these kind of things that we're talking about is a little bit like a side, a little bit like forgotten, I would say, to some extent, and still mostly running in some silos. Also, there is a kind of a pretty big challenge in the sense of data transferring, HCP identification when they're registering, when they're attending, when they need to match with the existing database, this kind of stuff. Just to give you the fresh example, what we're currently working with one of the campaign for the webinar, we have overall 334 registrants. But after that, we have the next stage. We have this goal to send the additional invitation to those who did not register previously. So we just took the registrants that we have, this 360 and 34, and match them with our initial segment that we used for the for sending invitation, and we got just 118 matches. So all other like users, registrants here, this difference between 334 and 150, it's just newcomers or the users that registered with another email. So this kind of this situation when they have, for example, work email in our core database and they're registering with a private email.
And a
And we have
personal
this
one.
discrepancy. Yeah, and this actually gives a lot of this discrepancy to the data. And we see in general from 10 to 40% on average, this kind of discrepancy in each webinar that we're supporting.
Olivier, let me bring you into this discussion. What do you think there, in terms of the challenges? What should we probably be focusing on the most, whether it's registrations or personal emails using corporate emails and sort of the disconnect there between the data that comes in? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I fully echo Pavlo's words, to be honest. But if I just take a step back, to me, the primary challenge when it comes to webinars is how do I get my message across? How do I access the right HCPs with my content? Webinars is a channel. Events are a channel. So webinars are in some sort, as Pavlo, you said, part of that ecosystem. But it's one particular lever that's been pulled over and over again over the past 3 years for the reasons that we know. And in all fairness, they've grown exponentially. The format hasn't really evolved over time. And we're just bombarded with content and with webinar invitations all the time. Just open your LinkedIn feed and the number of webinars that are out there is ridiculous. So,
we're obviously hosting one today,
yeah,
Olivier.
exactly. Case in point, Exhibit A.
Exhibit A.
So my first point is, how do you drive attendance to your event?
Exactly.
How do you actually, that's to me the primary channel is we're more exposed than ever before. So how do you cut across all the noise and get the right people to attend your event? As far as the goals are concerned, to me, it's obviously growing. It's a reach. It's a question of reach. How do you actually get more HCPs in your ecosystem, in your database, in your CRM, with giving them their consent to talk with them after the event? So it's a tool that you can use to grow your database. That's, I think, is one of the primary objectives. The second objective is for the HCPs that you do know, or the HCPs that are walking into your event, is how do you enrich those records? So events, as we know, are a data gold mine. So the amounts of questions that people will ask today, the claps that you might give, all of these are very valuable pieces of information. The content, the attendance, which sessions you registered for. This is very valuable information for personalized follow-ups. Being able to know that Dr. Pavlo joined events on this specific topic, ask questions about this specific therapy, will empower the field rep or the MSL, whoever, to actually follow up in a more personalized manner. As a matter of fact, we have a customer who's been able to demonstrate that just knowing that your HCP attended an event or a webinar gave you up to 60% more chance of getting a meeting with him if you contacted him in the following 7 days. So I do think there's very valuable objectives to be had here.
So the title of our webinar is obviously Achieving HCP Engagement with an Omnichannel Event Approach. And I would like to bring in Pavlo here into the conversation. How do you think incorporating omnichannel event strategy within for pharmaceutical companies will actually help them achieve their core goal here, and essentially contribute to the overall engagement? And obviously, Olivier, you're more than welcome to contribute to this answer, but I would like to hear what Pavlo has to say on that end.
Of course, you need to work on them separate, like several dimensions. So first of all, you need to realize that it's not like some add-on that you have someone there. You need to really put it inside. So Pharma more or less like get used to this approach that we need to try to align, put in their holistic approach, like emails, e-detailings, face-to-face visits somehow. Yeah, this kind of stuff, landings maybe. But yeah, as I said previously, webinar is still a little bit apart, but we still not forget that it's huge. Like, for example, how many times each HCP pay into email? Okay, 30 seconds, 1 minute. How long typical face-to-face visits? 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, like, but webinar is pretty huge. You have like 45 minutes or 1 hour of attention of your potential audience, yeah, and a lot of data that you have about this, yeah, you need really to incorporate. You need to make it visible for the field force representative, yeah. You need to have this data and identify the users and see this as a chain of the overall touch points, yeah, because as I said, it's huge, yeah. And when you fully incorporate and sense of visibility that you see, identify the user, see this data about him, and can use this data in order to build and customize the relationship with him, yeah. As Olivier said, yeah, if you know that he was conducted webinar, it's much easier for you to engage him with face-to-face visits, yeah. And the personalization really lies here. So the core, maybe one of the core answer to your question is really take into account when you're personalizing this communication experience. So just like a more or less practical tip here, if, for example, the medical representative, before they conducting the visit, see that the HCP attended webinar with this kind of topic, he will know that, yes, okay, I know that he is engaged. I need to move further, yeah, and extend the agenda and with some advanced topic. But if he see this HCP does not attend the webinar, didn't pay attention to I need to start from the very beginning, yeah, and maybe like given the basic information. And when the HCP really participated and you like given him the same stuff, oh my God, you are just repeating the same stuff that I heard on the webinar. So that is the stuff that how you need to deal with it and how you need to take into account practically.
So speaking of dealing with it, Olivier, what practical recommendations can you give us, can you give our audience to not only launch a successful webinar as part of an omnichannel strategy, but to also maximize HCP engagement?
Yes, so I think in plain and simple terms, I would have to say, make it easy. Make it easy for people to join your webinar, and make it easy to understand what you're going to be talking about and whether it's relevant to them. So I think if you want to maximize the impact, you need to have a frictionless invitation registration process. And most importantly, you also need to make sure that you're sending it to the right people. We have a tendency to treat our audience as a single entity, when in fact they're actually inviting each and every one might actually do more damage than good. It might actually just create more noise and ambiguity rather than focusing on the ones where you think you'll actually have an impact. The second practical tip, I guess, that I can give is an event. And I think there's a question in the chat of this, I think. It doesn't have to start at 4 p.m. CET on a Thursday. It can start before then, and it can continue long after that. So being able to build up the momentum ahead of the event, ask your questions, and I think we'll talk about emerging trends after. Asking questions in advance, engaging your participants in advance will drive attendance, which again was one of the primary challenge ahead of the event. And the last, I guess, practical recommendation I would make, which is a bit more technical, is capitalize on that value. Having a webinar as a standalone and delivering a great experience is very valuable, but taking that data and using it afterwards is even more valuable. And that's why I think that in where it's possible, I think you should connect your event platform or your webinar technology to your CRM to automate these workflows and make sure you can reuse that data afterwards.
I'm glad that you mentioned the CRM and the data. That sort of brings us to the cases that I mentioned in the very beginning of this webinar. The first one being one-click registration utilizing SpotMe and Viva CRM and marketing automation integration. So let's bring the slides back up. And a word to our audience before we dive into the case here. Please keep an eye on the Q&A section. Please submit your questions throughout the webinar. And again, we'll have a poll right after this. So I do expect seeing very, very interesting responses and answers throughout this conversation. Pavlo, let's dive in here. Let's talk about this case. How does the one-click registration approach contribute to an overall HCP engagement within the actual omnichannel strategy?
Okay, so I will not dive into many technical details, but just overview the core steps, how this kind of one-click registration look like, how it's works. Yeah, for from the user perspective. Yeah, so initially we send in the invitation message to our core segment that we defined that needs to be invited here to our event. It could be really different messages. It's really like omnichannel for us. So we can use email, SMS, yeah, personal invitation, yeah, approved emails, WhatsApp we're currently actively using, yeah, in the combination of the webinars. So user gets the message, HCP gets the message, yeah, sees some kind of description and some button, just one button, yeah, clicks this button within the message here and gets to the landing page. Within this landing page, we're given the all details about the webinars itself, yeah, speakers, agenda, yeah, where it will happen, yeah, all this kind of details. And also within this page, so for example, we're using this inbuilt functionality in Salesforce multi-cloud platform with the inbuilt landing pages that called cloud pages, yeah. There's just one button, no forms to populate, because we already know our audience. We have the segment, we have these emails, we know who they are, first names, last name, yeah, emails, workplace. We, in most cases, we know these details, yeah. So we just have the one button that user needs to click in order to finally register, to explicitly, yeah, say that yes, I want to participate. No form for them to populate. They really don't need to bother about this kind of details. So clicking this one button. After that, all his details that we know about him, yeah, his email, first name, last name, is transferred automatically to the SpotMe platform based on our built integration, yeah, that we created. SpotMe register it on the platform and give us back the personal link to attend the webinar. So we just dynamically put this link into the confirmation message. Once again, it could be a variety of message. For some users, it could be emails. For some users, it could be SMS. For some users, it could be WhatsApp, any kind of other channels. Yeah, so whatever. We put this link. User just clicks this link in the some proper time, for example, like 4 p.m. Today, yeah, and joins the webinar. So from user perspective, it's all just a couple of clicks, yeah, from him in order to be a part of the webinar.
Olivier, I do want you to sort of elaborate a bit more on what Pavlo said, and in terms of, you mentioned several times driving the attendance, and how does that play in here, and what role does that play on reducing friction for the admin and the organizer of the webinar?
There's very little to add, to be honest, because the so what of this slide is pretty much as few steps as possible for the HCP. It's kind of like when you do an online purchase, right? If you have 10 or 15 steps to register or create an account, it's just going to discourage a lot of people from doing it. But if you just have a one click, the incentive is very, very, very good for someone to just confirm their presence to a webinar, and they receive the email at the top of their inbox when the webinar time comes along. So it's really about removing all the effort from the HCP and putting it on the technology.
Thanks for that answer. We don't need the slides up anymore, but we'll definitely get back to them in section 2 of our webinar. Pavlo, let's talk a little bit more about the challenges that have been encountered during the implementation of the integration. I'd like to talk about addressing them, but also about the improvements that have been based upon the feedback of the audience and the HCPs directly.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there is a number of challenges, as always. And as you saw it from user perspective, from HCP perspective, it looks pretty simple. But as like a formula, if you want to have the simplicity on the front end for the user, you need to bring this complexity at the back end. So at the back, there is a lot of work that we have done, yeah, that SpotMe have done in order to integrate, for example, SpotMe and Viva. There is a lot of stuff that we need to consider about this kind of user identification, yeah, consent management, yeah, different ideas like emails and so on, especially if you're using this omnichannel approach and with many channels. So we need to really bring to us this complexity. And you need to be ready for this. There is always the price, and price it is effort that you need to put in order to bring this simple, seamless experience to the user. So all this pain, unfortunately, you need to take it. So at least you need to think about how it works, how you manage it, different cases. And one of the cases, one of the challenges that we actually had after we implement this approach, implemented. That the user asked, okay, this approach is pretty good, is working fine for our existing audience. But in many cases, we have this mixed approach. We're using it some audience that we are inviting, for example, through the existing channels, direct channels like emails, SMS, messages, and so on. And some user will just come because they hear about the webinar, because they saw the banner on the LinkedIn, and so on. So there will be the mix. Some user from our database and some user from other database. Yeah, so we also need to cover this second bench, second variation of the approach when we're dealing with some users, with some form population for the new users, newcomers. And of course, we need on the back end to compare with the existing database in order to not create the duplicates. Yeah, if the user, for example, registering, we think it's like newcomer, but we already have it in the database, we need to match it. We need to match this user, yeah, and also highlight it in our database. So all this kind of how you really work with this data, how you work with the consent, how you work with this DCR, data change management request from the CRM part, it's pretty huge and pretty challenging.
So Olivier, let's talk a little bit more about the role integrations play in sort of providing better personalization and customization when it comes to the client, when it comes to the experiences that we provide them with.
Well, the reality, Yuliya, first of all, thank you, Pavlo, for those insights. But the reality is the nature of life sciences is there's a lot of events, right? We have customers who run hundreds, if not thousands of events on SpotMe. And the reality is if you want to scale and if you want to use that data, you just cannot do it manually. It's just physically not possible. So that's why integrations are necessary. I agree with the fact that in the early days, integrations were a term for rocket scientists, right? So APIs and custom fields, and depending on which instance, in which country, which custom objects and custom fields you were using, it was a dreadful effort both on the customer and on the vendor to put these bridges in place. So that's why actually when you talk about what have we done to improve this, and Pablo, I'm glad you talked about Viva. We basically chose to remove that complexity as well. So we had achieved removing the friction from the end user, but now you need to get people to actually use that integration. And if it's inoperable, if it's difficult, if it's clunky, people are not going to use it. So in collaboration with Viva and actually other systems out there, marketing automation, Salesforce, and so on, we've actually built 2 years ago a native connector. And by native, that means that it's literally you install it and you put in your VISEVEN ID, and then the bridge is made. That means that when you actually deploy that integration, you don't have to create custom fields, you don't have to create custom objects. All of it already exists in Viva. So that was really the missing piece, because as much as you had the technology there, if you don't have the user experience, if it's not easy, again, and people are not going to use it. So to me, that's very, very important.
So let's talk about sort of simplifying things and making things easy. I do have a question for our audience. I mentioned the poll that we're going to have throughout the webinar. To what extent has your organization adopted an omnichannel event approach for HCP engagement? I would like you to choose from the following answers. Fully integrated across all channels with all types of events, partially integrated, still in progress, just started integrating, not adopted yet, but considering it, not considering adopting an omnichannel approach. I don't know who would select that during our webinar. I don't know. Why would you select that during a webinar? But please let us know. We will address the results in about 30 seconds from now. But this will also bring us to the very sort of not heated discussion. I don't want to get heated here, but definitely talk about an omnichannel approach and the importance of implementing it within organizations. Pavlo, what's your take on that?
You mean like what do I think where most pharma
why
stands?
you need to implement an omnichannel approach, because that's essentially what we're asking our audience, and some of them might not even be considering it. Again, I'm not sure whom, but you never know.
I was speaking on a panel recently at an event, and I remember even speaking to a customer who told me that they wanted to ban the word omnichannel from their organizations because in some organizations, omnichannel is merely a dream on the horizon, is something that people talk about, but in practice, It's still something very fuzzy, very difficult to implement and understand what it actually means. But to me, if I had to summarize it, and I think Yasin in the comments has put it very nicely, is how do I get the right content to the right HCP at the right time? And in a world where we're all very, very bombarded, more exposed to content than ever before, I think it's not a nice to have. It's something that you must be looking at very seriously.
Definitely. You need to run in order to at least be at the same position where you are currently. Because if you will not do it, just will other company will do it, the standards will grow up. And you will just be left behind. So if someone else provides this kind of more advanced experience, simplifies the user experience, bring more personalization, for example, events, the experience will be better. So they will join competitors' events, not yours. So it's not like that you are choosing not to be there. It's not like the funny stuff. Maybe it was like 10 years ago for Pharma or so. Currently, just how things is going. You need to move forward.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Pavlo, but I definitely wanted to bring the point of Olivier mentioning that it's something a bit fuzzy for some of the companies. Partially integrated, still in progress. Quite a big number. Almost 67% of our audience are partially integrating omnichannel approach. And yes, not a single person mentioned the fact that they're not considering it, which makes me very excited and happy about that. But more than 16% are actually haven't adopted yet, but are considering an omnichannel approach. So that's still a big number, and that's fairly large percentage of organizations are essentially just thinking about working with an omnichannel approach when it comes to their events.
And it's not a little tactical initiative that you can just run with it and see what happens. Typically, the bigger the organization, the longer it takes to put a winning omnichannel strategy in place. It's not just events, it's lots of moving pieces. It's medical affairs, it will be marketing, it'll be all the field, all the different pieces need to work together, IT systems, platforms, and so on. So it takes a bit of effort to get things moving, and it's not an overnight journey. It's something that we've seen accelerating over the past couple of years, and customers getting further and further along on that journey. Well, it's easy to say once we have the results, but I'm not entirely surprised by the outcome.
Precisely. The results sort of reflect the industry that we're in. And obviously being the pharma and life sciences industry is a lot about personalization, but also about measurement and ethical considerations in HCP engagement. So that brings us to our section 2 of the webinar. And Olivier, let's follow up a bit on the thought of, how do you measure the success and the effectiveness of an omnichannel event approach? Because given the numbers that just came in from the poll, a lot of companies are considering implementing it. Perhaps key metrics that should be considered when implementing approach, could they sway that decision and speed it up a bit more?
Well, there's what we call the first level metrics, right? Which are, are people actually showing up to my events? That's probably the first. How many people are registering and how many people are attending? So that you look at conversion. Then obviously am I providing the right content to these HCPs? Are they engaging with it? So today we're seeing we have a certain amount of claps, we have questions, we have answers to polls, which is great. So that means that hopefully what we're telling you is engaging. So that's pretty much the event level metrics that you provide. But over the past, the past 12 months, we've seen a lot of customers shifting their focus to the CXQ metrics, so the customer experience quotient, which is in effect a function of trust, simplicity, and relevance. So do I trust what you're telling me? How simple was it to use your technology or to join your event? And how relevant was the content for me? So I think if you're winning at omnichannel, all those parameters should be in the green.
Pavlo, what do you think? You mentioned that in the previous section, but what role does personalization play in an omnichannel strategy? How can companies essentially tailor their approach to individual preferences of HCPs and address their needs? And some of the questions throughout the Q&A section are reflective of that. So I would like you to talk a little bit more about the personalization aspect here.
I think I will not be like original here and say that that's an essential role, actually, personalization playing for us. It's not just a buzzword that we would like to personalize because we would like to be like fancy and pleasant to our audience. It's because the personalization helps us break through the noise. A lot of this message bombarding, a lot of events here, Olivier mentioned previously, a lot of events, user like trying to get our HCPs here to the events here. So really a war, I would say, here for the attention, for the time of the HCP. Yeah. So by personalizing experience, you really try to break through the noise. It's fair for the whole omnichannel, and as we said, yeah, events just should be a part of the overall holistic omnichannel approach. So we really need to pay it of the channel. So first of all, yeah, what channels you're using to invite your audience to the so for different users could be different channel mix and different channels here. What channels you are using for like reminds about in the actually the webinar to boost the attendance. First of all, yeah, do not forget, because yeah, busy day, a lot of on the schedule, just you get this instant messages that hey, in 50 minutes or 20 minutes, yeah, we're live. Go to the channel. Yeah, what time actually you're saying? Then it shouldn't be the same time for all. So someone is planning his day from the very beginning. Yeah, someone is like planning ahead, like where he will be participated in next Thursday or something. Yeah, and still you need to really to have this data that is crossing properly. So in order to personalize this experience, you need to have the proper data about the HCP itself, about his previous action. Yeah, actually, for example, yeah, the understanding. Did he participate in the previous events? Which channel we used here in order to bring him in? Will be one of the core like predictor. Will he participate in this event and not? Yeah, and really creating this different segment based on behavioral data will be crucial for us to personalize experience for them in order to boost overall engagement level.
Mm. And if I can add to that as well, Pavlo, because Yasin is on fire in the questions here.
Yeah, I was about to say, Yasin is asking great, excellent questions. Keep them coming, please.
But he's actually got a very good point here. Is how do you make this real and not just a vision on the horizon? So I see a lot of customers being very, very data driven. So give me all the data I can get. I'm going to connect, build bridges, and I'm going to put everything in the data lake, and we're going to crunch some great insights and so on. And then you speak to the MSL or the rep, and they've actually got no idea what's actually happening, right? There's a huge disconnect. So I guess there's different layers that you can follow. You don't have to have everything perfect from day one. But Yasin, if I can take your questions on what does it actually mean. So let's just say you're an HCP and I'm a rep and I'm in my CRM and I see, hey, Yasin attended a webinar on HCP engagement. Just knowing the fact that you attended, so it's showing up on your timeline, I'm getting a notification. The first call to action or next best action for me is, hey, Yasin's probably interested in events. I'm actually going to ask, or I'm the rep, I'm going to contact Yasin and tell him, hey, would you like to know more about events? And I can actually tailor my message and narrow it down a little bit more for you. If I'm coming to you with an offer and a value that's relevant to what you're interested in, you're more likely to take the call. But I can take it a step further. In the question above, you asked, what integrations are we looking at? Is there a native integration? I could actually follow up and say, hey, would you like to connect your events to your CRM? Here's the diagram of our Viva integration. Can we have a chat about it? Is this something you're interested in? Because I've taken your questions and I've used it to actually personalize my follow-up with you.
Olivier, I'd like to sort of follow up with Maria's question, and she's asking about what type of events we should use SpotMe to organize. So perhaps you could mention that a bit more before we dive into our second case that I promised our audience at the very beginning of the webinar.
And I also promised myself this wasn't going to be a promotional event. But thank you, Maria. So today we're using SpotMe for webinars. We also have a native app capability, which basically allows you to cover different formats. In life sciences, that actually means that you can use SpotMe for congresses, for medical education standalones, for investigator meetings, for ad boards, for symposia. Basically all these events that are HCP facing, or most of the use cases. I like to steer away maybe from the small one-to-one or one-to-few field meetings. because yes, that's probably potentially overcooking it. But yeah, I'm happy to take this offline if you're interested in hearing more about it.
Thanks for that answer, Maria. Hopefully, Olivier answered your question in full. Let's dive into the case number 2. Let's bring back the slides that we had. And Pavlo, talk to us about the challenges that have been sort of encountered during the implementation of the simple webinar registration process on the HCP web portal, and how have they been addressed, and what should we probably be paying most attention to at this point?
Okay, so the second case is actually about the more or less the same. Yeah, simplifying the registration with just one click, or but it's embedded into the portal. So in order to register on the event, you just go through the registration process on the portal, and after that, within the portal, you have just the same experience with just a webinar webinar section, some particular webinar, and just one button that you need to click in order to register on the portal. And of course, the same stuff, the same approach. In order to bring simplicity for the user, you need to bring really the pretty huge complexity on the back end. Yeah. So first of all, the registration process on the web portal and aligning this data with our data transfer into SpotMe. So first challenge. Yeah. The second challenge that is pretty huge about the consent management. How we're dealing, for example, for the user, if there's someone new registered on the portal, we need to validate that it's real HCP. There is some time a grace period when we have in order to validate this user, for example, with a IQ1 key database or something similar, or internal database and so on. If there is, for example, no automatical match in email with the existing database that we have. Yeah. So and deal of, for example, and also the next challenge that is different companies using different CMS platform. Someone use Drupal, someone use Adobe Experience Manager, WordPress, and so on and so forth. There could be like variety of platforms. So you need to create like all this technical backend integration for different CMS platforms. Yeah. So it's also give you some complexity. But once again, after you have done it once, after you integrate everything, test everything, after that it's pretty convenient for the user, and it's also runs more or less smoothly for you as well. So you don't need to be afraid to put some investment to think about these use cases, deal with them like one by one, implement it. Yeah, invest one time. Yeah, work with your IT colleagues, for example, and after that it will be simple for the user. What we're actually aiming.
Yes, we mentioned that, and Olivier mentioned that several times, simplifying things. And speaking of simplifying things, I'd like to talk about user feedback. How much of an improvement can be implemented based on that feedback, and whether companies should be looking into that more in depth? Olivier?
To me, there's a huge benefit in having, so if you take a traditional Zoom webinar or Teams and so on, typically what you'll do is after the event, maybe an hour after or the day after, you'll send a link to a survey by email. Chances are, if you're lucky, you'll get a 10% hit rate on that survey, and you're not actually going to be capturing that feedback. So to go back to Yasin's point, you know that the person attended, but you don't have the feedback on how they felt, if they have additional questions. So the ability to have in the moment right there a feedback form, a survey that you can push right at the end of the session, and have automated cadences for the people who haven't yet filled it out is quite important, because that's on autopilot. You're not harassing the people who've already filled it out, and you collect that feedback, because in the end, that qualitative verbiage from your HCPs is what's going to enable you to follow up more personally.
Thanks for that answer, Olivier. Pavlo, I'd like to talk a little bit more about security measures and data privacy. You talked about that a bit. What's in place right now to protect sensitive information, obviously, during the registration process? And what should we be paying attention to when it comes to securing the HCP's privacy?
First of all, we need to understand that it's a little bit like a trick in sense of balance. So from one perspective, we're telling about personalization. So in order to personalize the experience, you need to get really the data about the user, about the HCPs. Yeah. From other perspective, everyone is like concerned, about their privacy, what you're doing with my data, and so on. So we need to really find this balance. Yeah. So the best formula here is really to if we know that we'll use this data to personalize experience, let's ask for them, let's like collect it. If we will not use it, so why are you actually collecting the data? Just collecting data for the sake of the data, it's not worth it, actually. Yeah. The next part, of course, when you like creating the registration process, for example, on the web portal, yeah. So asking for the data, you need to really to work with the database security, all these kind of things. Yeah. But I think that is most vulnerable part is really the people. You need to limit the number of people, number of like specialists who really has direct access to this data. Because
That's a
people,
great
it's always
point.
like the weak point, yeah, for all
That's
security
an excellent
part.
point. We probably don't need the slides up anymore. And speaking of access to data, Olivier, I'd like to ask you a bit more of an ethics question here. What ethical considerations need to be taken into account when implementing an omnichannel strategy for HCPs? Because as Pavlo had mentioned, who has the access to data matters.
Absolutely, and it's a question now that we cannot avoid. So we're working on a number of large RFPs or with large customers, and there's no question. There's obviously a strong part of the proposal is about, okay, what's happening to my data? Where is it stored? Who can access it? So it's quite important to be able to provide some guarantees with regards to data access and security. So at SpotMe, for instance, we're not a data owner. So whatever data is harvested during an event is not ours. It's always the customers. And that's very important, because we in no way, shape, or form we could contact your HCPs. And making sure as well that it complies with local regulations, right? Our marketing team a little while ago did a very extensive research piece on compliance in pharma events and in virtual events, because obviously there's a lot of uncharted waters here. So it's very important to provide those guarantees, just like when you create an event, which is something we take a lot of pride in as well, is being able to determine where the data will be hosted. So if you're running an event from the US, it obviously makes sense that your data be hosted there, and vice versa for Europe or Asia Pacific. So those guarantees now, especially since we're talking a lot more about omnichannel, we're talking a lot more to buyers with a technical background and who are obviously mandated to ensure that those security measures and who accesses the data, the ethics questions are being met.
Thanks for that answer. And that brings us to the second poll of the day. We've talked a little bit about it throughout the webinar, but I would like our audience to let us know what strategies are they currently using to engage HCPs during the events. Please select the most appropriate one. Live Q&A sessions, interactive polling, breakout sessions, virtual networking sessions, gamification techniques, and the last one would probably be I'm not sure. Give us a bit of time for the answers to come in, but Pavlo, talk to our audience about the fact that implementing certain strategies to engage HCPs matters, and webinars are just a part of a general omni-channel event approach.
Yeah,
it's
actually,
more than that. It's more than webinars, even though we're hosting one today.
It's more than that. Yes, I think that people honestly a little bit forgotten that it's a huge opportunity to gain this two-way like dialogue. Yeah. So because like in most cases here, like drop an email, you will not get the response for this email. Yeah. So it just be like someone will click, open it, and so on. Yeah. But during the webinar, you have this brilliant possibility really to ask questions here, to hear the audience here, polls here, surveys, all this kind of stuff. You can really create this bidirectional connection with the audience, get some insights from them, get some pinpoints, really build this kind of more lived discussion, and after that, use this data after that to personalize the further experience. What Olivier previously have told to us, that it's not only the webinar itself, it's what you are doing prior to the webinar and what you're doing after the webinar, how using this data. For example, okay, if you saw there is some specific user interested in some part, you can like cut into different like pieces and send it additionally, or you have this interest for this part of the user with this topic particular, and you have additional information, for example, e-detailing that is covering this topic, so you can like give it to your field force, for example, and saying, hey guys, this part of the audience, not all of them, this part is really would like to focus on this topic. Yeah, bring it to them.
Well, the
Nothing
results
more.
are in. Thank you for that answer, Pavlo. The
Q&A
results are
session.
in. We do have a very close numbers between live Q&A sessions and interactive polling, which is very interesting, I must say. Breakout sessions are about 13%, and virtual networking sessions are almost 9%. Gamification techniques are 11 and 6%, and I'm not sure about 4%. So yes, and thank you for that question. You did ask our speakers about the examples of good gamification techniques. Talk to us a little bit about that. How would you be able to populate your CRM data with gamification? Olivier, I'll give you that question.
Yes, I like the question, and it's true that in life science, gamification is not always received as actually, this sounds a little bit too childish, or not very competitive bunch. So I might actually stay clear of this. To be honest, gamification is maybe not the right term here. You could call it an activity checklist, an activity challenge, and it's actually, what do you want your participants to do during this event? What would be really valuable for you as the organizer that your participants do? And then you build different actions and call to actions in your event. So I want them to connect with peers. I want them to register for sessions. I want them to download this specific document. And all of these things, it can be points, it can be a check mark, but it's the glue that's going to hold your event together. And that's going to drive more actions, more interactions from your participants. So in a sense, it's not just about fostering a competitive environment among your HCPs. That potentially doesn't really apply at all. It's about how to get more from your audience, and how do you make sure they know where to look, or know where to find what they need to do. So that's the way our customers are typically using gamification.
So it is about personalization, engagement, all those aspects that sort of are intertwined within that term. Well, let's look ahead towards the future. And that brings us to our section 3 of the webinar today, focusing on emerging trends and recommendations for HCP engagement. Throughout the webinar, you both sort of gave our audience a bit of pointers, but I would like us to focus a little bit more on the actual trends for HCP engagement when it comes to omnichannel approach, and how can companies leverage these trends to create impactful experiences. Pavlo, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Olivier.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, yeah, I think we already touched it a little bit. Yeah. So this holistic approach, when you really starting to treat events not as like some kind of silos put aside and bring it into their close. In reality, just you start to think, okay, how we really can like put it into the play, and not just like keep them in silos. Yeah. So second part is really we're not using only emails to invite the audience. Yeah. So there's a variety of different channels that we can use in order to bring them in order for them to drive registration, to drive attendance rate, and really this integration. Yeah. So before that, almost all Pharma webinar, like 5 years ago or so, were like we just have, like, for example, Zoom. We set up events there, and we just like invite users here to some landing pages. That's all. No like free data transfer. And a lot of this manual work with the downloading reports. Yeah, trying to match. I remember that was like separate team on the client side that is like was responsible for getting the data manually from the webinar platform and match it by the titles, by the like names and so on with the existing database. So pretty, I would say, not good work here. For that actually automation needs to take place here, and it's way more efficient. And the people need to do like people job. Yeah, think about strategy, think about next step, and machine should do their machine work. So definitely, and companies starting to actively working on it and thinking how they can automate the process.
Olivier,
and
let's
how
talk
to be,
about
Yep.
let's talk about these trends that Pavlo mentioned, and that are essentially impacting HCP engagement. I would like you to walk our audience through the slide a bit more, because it is back up on the screen. What are your thoughts on that? And I would also like to address a question from Colm. What are your thoughts on hybrid meetings, and whether that's a trend these days?
Well, there's I can only do one thing at a time. So I'll start.
Let's start with the slides, and then we'll get to the question.
Interestingly enough, if I think back on the poll, you had the two greatest hits, which are live polling and Q&A. I'd like to think these are the no-brainers, right? They're the ones that you typically need to have for an event, in whatever way, shape, or form. But if you really want your event to stand out, if you want to create memorable and immersive experiences, we've seen customers go a lot further. So if you think of events as a three-stage process, so activation is getting your people in, getting them to start engaging with your content. Give them a voice, ask them to submit questions in advance, build their own agendas, submitting their case. You can give them snippets or teasers of content, which might spark their attention, give them even more. If they were on the edge, that might actually give them the little push they need to attend. A knowledge ladder is things that we've seen every now and then as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but basically you test your participants' knowledge at the beginning of the event and you test it after, and you can see whether or not the average knowledge, if your message has actually come across, is quite interesting. So it's all about providing a different experience, something that will stand you out from the rest of the bunch. As when it comes to the actual event experience, yes, Q&A good, polling good, but why not provide something maybe a bit more different? So meeting the expert one-on-one, so having breakout sessions, not very common, but it's if you want to provide something different, it's definitely the way to go. Simulive sessions. So here today we are speaking to you live. This is really us in real time, but you could have pre-recorded sessions for the main lecture, which provide you with the opportunity to re-edit, to provide maybe a bit more of a video production on it, and then go live for the Q&A part. This also helps raise the bar on some experiences. Low-tech hybrid is another trend as well. So being able to have in the room a group of HCPs, and also some remote ones. So having different hubs where you can connect your speakers, connect your remote audience, but still having one in the same platform. And it doesn't have to be hard. So this is where I'm coming to you, Colm, for your question. Yes, SpotMe does handle hybrid. As I mentioned before, we have the native event app, the in-person event app, but also the web app that you're viewing this webinar on today. And the reality is, it's all about reach, and you cannot force people to go in person and attend your event. Some people might have constraints, it might be too far or so on, but it shouldn't be deprived from your content. So if you're able to stream your event onto the platform and provide the exact same access to content, networking opportunities, engagement opportunities, just because you're remote doesn't mean you're a second-class citizen. You have access to the exact same content, and it doesn't have to be really hard. On the post-event side, some of the emerging trends that we're seeing as well is being able to provide interactive surveys. So those static forms, I don't know about you, Pavlo, but they look a lot like one another, and it's always the same question. So if there's a module that allows you to build on people's answers and create a bit more of a dynamic experience, that's something that works quite well. Extending, obviously, the duration of your event. So this very webinar, I'm assuming, will be posted on demand shortly after, because you cannot expect everybody to be available at 4 p.m. on a Thursday. Some HCPs actually do have very important jobs, but they might actually want to watch the event later when they actually have the time. So engaging on demand afterwards is very important. And personalized follow-ups, obviously, we've talked about it earlier. So being able to take those pieces of information and data from your event and using it in such a way that it maximizes the impact. The content hub at the very bottom here again is just an ability to host all of your content in one place on demand, where your HCPs can really easily find by therapeutical area, by brand or whatever, find the content that's relevant to them in one single space, and rather than having to look everywhere for the right content. So I think in a nutshell, there's there's a bit more than polling and Q&A and lots of things that we can try out. And it's all about your audience, your type of event, and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Well, we'll definitely send a follow-up to our audience after this, and we'll send them a recording, of course. As you mentioned, a lot of HCPs have very important things to do on the Thursday afternoon. Pavlo, I'd like to get your take a little bit more on how do successful life sciences and pharma companies strive to create more value for HCPs throughout events.
Yeah, so what exactly it's when you're trying to think about how you can boost your engagement level and so on, couple of just examples how we managed to work with it. So first of all, sometimes, for example, you're thinking more like on the same level, always, for example, on the country level. So if you, for example, a little bit struggling with this country level, you can think about more like regional, on the level, for example, even at city. So in one company, we even used this approach when we created not one, but was a series of webinars. It's more like something in between webinar and roundtable, I would say, because in each webinar, it was on the level of each city, and participants were like 12 or 20. And we give actually a lot of voice to these participants, and their speaker, key opinion leader, was like pretty known in this city. So it's like more like peer-to-peer conversation with a really good engagement level. So instead of one webinar on the country level, we had like 12, I would say, or something, webinar on different like core cities level. So yes, next one, as Olivier previously mentioned, is really good stuff, is this hybrid events. When you, for example, especially for the huge one, so you inviting some users to attend the physical part. If they cannot, you can just give them this additional ability to join the online part. So this kind of mix experience is really good for them, and it feels a little bit different. It feels like there's a stage, there's a people, some present, and like also I'm with them there. You see this participant from time to time, for example, during this kind of live session, and so on. And work on engagement. You need to really to boost this engagement, as we tell all this time. Work with numbers. Just you compare your numbers that you have on this webinar with the similar webinars that you have in the past, and think just what additionally I can do really here. It's not that the case that you are like boosting it like 2 times. If you can do something and boost it like a couple percentage here on this, couple percent next webinar, step by step, you'll really like boost your overall engagement.
As we're nearing towards the end of the webinar on an HCP engagement, I would like to talk to you, Olivier, a bit about sort of the industry insights and best practices. And what can you give our audience at this moment to talk about how to put our recommendations, top recommendations from you, how to put them to practice and maximize HCP engagement to essentially achieve desired outcomes?
Yes, thank you, Yuliya. So I've actually got a slide for that, which is my way, maybe a bit complicated, but to explain what we've spoken about today. Yes, getting to omnichannel excellence is not an overnight journey, but there's baby steps along the way that you can take. And what you're seeing here is basically we've taken all of our customers and we say, well, what if we had to put each of them in different boxes and see where they fit on that journey, on that maturity journey to omnichannel. And basically doing events is important, is part of the pharmaceutical business model to create awareness, to get share of voice, to get your message across. And some cases you get the DIY events with reg only, no technology, or if you're doing a webinar, you're using Zoom, and that's pretty much it. And then a survey monkey off the back of it. But you're missing out on a lot of benefits. And then if you start bringing in some technology into this, an event technology platform, and a balanced events mix, so not just only in person because you like seeing people, but taking into consideration channel affinity, so how HCPs like to engage with you. This is where you'll start to get higher satisfaction from your participants. You'll have more impact and you'll reach more people. As you keep going, and you start to reduce the number of tools that you're using, which is, by the way, what we've seen over the past 3 years. I think, Pavlo, you and I have had that discussion. You're basically narrowing down the effort it takes to run events, because it's consistent, it's templatized, it's automated, and it's easier to run it, and it's more cost effective, as a matter of fact. If you start connecting it to your CRM, to your marketing automation tool, this is where you get some efficiencies, you reduce some friction. And obviously, as you start working with on demand is not a swear word. It's something people like to consume content on their own time, on their own turf. So it's also important to embrace it. So here you reduce cost and you get a lot of efficiencies in the process, both from you and for your HCPs. And finally, once you've done all of this, you can unlock the true power of Omnichannel. You can get the data in the system of record, and you can derive some call to actions. So next best action for the rep or for others in the right channel. And you can also start to collect the consent from your HCPs as well in the process. So you have more access and more conversion in accessing to your HCPs, and ultimately this results in obviously a better situation for the whole company. So I just want to say that yes, omnichannel, sometimes it's a big word. It's a lot to look at, but there's lots of steps we can take to get there.
Olivier, thank you so much for that answer and for the slide. We are nearing the end of the webinar, as I mentioned, and we are probably going to run slightly over. But I do thank all our audience for their questions, and we did our best to answer them throughout the sessions. If you have follow-up questions, please submit them on our social media as well. As some of you have noticed, we're going to go to the next slide here. V7 and SpotMe recently signed a partnership, and we are very excited to bring all our clients the best possible event experiences. So to learn more about the partnerships, go to our website, v7.com or spotme.com, and of course, follow our LinkedIn pages to keep an eye on the latest updates and trends. Olivier Aubert of SpotMe, Business Development and Partnerships Director at SpotMe, and Pavlo Klymenko of V7, Head of Omnichannel at V7. And I'm Yuliya Sotska of V7. I will definitely see you all at our next webinar. I'm sure that you've enjoyed the session just as much as I have, and I look forward to all your questions and comments on our social media, as I mentioned. Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you, Yuliya.
See you.